Hello, terrific teachers. This is Coach Cordova, and today I want to talk to you about implementing language objectives. Okay, the language objectives should be posted daily and they need to be aligned with your target. You need to have language objectives posted for every subject every single day. This is what we are looking for when we come into your classroom so that we know what the students are working on in the task at hand. So let's begin. What is it? What are language objectives? A language objective is a clear statement that tells how students will use language to learn and demonstrate understanding of a lesson's content. It focuses on listening, speaking, reading, or writing. Skills students will use during instruction, especially important for bilingual, ESL, or dual language classrooms, but beneficial for all learners. There are five key features to help you when you are developing and writing your language objectives. The first one being that you need to pay attention to if the language objective is aligned to the content objective and teaks that are being taught. Secondly, be sure to include language functions. For example, words like describe, explain, justify, compare, and summarize. Third, think about the specificity, language, or structure, and the vocabulary that students will use. Fourth, does this support academic language development? And five, does it support or help all students, especially the English learners, understand and practice academic language successfully? So, those are five key features to think about when you're developing and writing your language objectives. Some examples of language supports are sentence stems or sentence frames. For example, I predict that blank because of blank. The main idea is blank. Word banks are anchor charts as well, and a list of key vocabulary. For example, if you're teaching science, you could use vocabulary words such as evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. So you want to use those to help the students convey what they're learning. More examples of language supports are visuals or graphic organizers, diagrams, charts, or labeled pictures that connect language to meaning. You need to model and use repetition. And also, the teacher needs to model how to use new words and sentences before the students can practice. There are three important documents that you may use to help you when you are writing your language objectives. The first document is See, Say, Students Speak. The second document is the Colleen ISD Writing Effective Language Objectives document, as well as the third document being the Implementation Language Objectives document. Here is a breakdown of the See, Say, Students Speak document, or we call it sometimes triple S2. The poster explains that the See, Say, Students Speak strategy is used to build academic vocabulary and oral language. It emphasizes that students should see, hear, and use academic language consistently during lessons. C is the learning targets, language objectives, and vocabulary. They're visibly posted at eye level. Students reference visuals such as anchor charts and word walls. Say, teachers model and state the objectives and vocabulary while interacting with visuals and gestures. Students speak. Students actively use academic vocabulary aloud in completing sentences, engaging in multiple opportunities to practice and build mastery overall. The strategy increases understanding and communication through repeated visual, verbal, and interactive exposure to the academic language. The next document is the implementation of the language objectives, which is focusing on language writing. This poster explains how to implement language objectives effectively in the classroom. Teachers should, number one, write a clear language objective that aligns with the learning target and includes academic vocabulary. Number two, post it visibly so students can see and reference it. Number three, say and have students repeat the objective to reinforce the understanding. Four, model how to use sentence stems, visuals, and vocabulary supports. 5, provide time for students to use scaffolds in speaking, reading, writing, and listening. 6, monitor and assess how students apply the language objectives to guide differentiation. Overall, this process helps students build academic language and engage deeply with grade level content. And I must add that when you are introducing your students to the learning target and the language objective, be sure to focus and zone in on the vocabulary being used. That is a time to teach vocabulary so that students will understand what they're getting ready to learn. And it will save time on having to explain it. And so just be sure to reiterate the vocabulary within the language objective. The next important document is the KISD Effective Language Objective document. This focuses on language writing. This poster outlines the KISD framework for writing effective language objectives, guiding teachers through 4 key parts. The first part is to choose an action verb connected to a language domain. For example, you may have metalinguistic examples, writing, reading, speaking, or listening. Secondly, link everything to academic vocabulary and content, including the TEKS, by identifying essential vocabulary from the standard. Part 3, add supports and scaffolds such as visuals, sentence stems, word walls, and manipulatives to help students express their thinking. 4, include interaction by specifying how students will communicate with partners or groups in text or technology. Overall, it helps teachers create clear, purposeful language objectives that build academic vocabulary and promote meaningful student interaction. So remember, this is a document that you want to use so that you can break down all 4 parts to make sure you're including everything needed to have an effective language objective written. So let's break down the last document into parts. The first part is when you look at your learning target. For example, I can summarize a text in a way that maintains meaning and logical order. This is standard 5.7D. Notice that in this component, you're going to choose an action verb connected to at least one language domain. The language domain in this one was speaking, and the verb that was circled is discuss. So that is what you're going to include in your first part of your language objective. Now let's look at part 2. So the learning target is I can summarize a text in a way to maintain meaning and logical order. Now we're going to look at linking academic content, or TEKS. So you have to think about which vocabulary is essential to learn from the standard, or the IFD, or UFD. So that the important ones for this would be the key ideas, logical order, beginning, middle, or end. So if you look at the specificity, which you will find in your TCMPC document, it says summarizing may include determining key information, ideas, or details from a large section of text or whole text. Okay, so key ideas, which is the first one. Then it says differentiating between significant and less significant details, identifying the overall text structure, synthesizing and describing key ideas from the beginning, middle, and end of the text to maintain logical order, emphasizing the author's intended message, incorporating applicable vocabulary as necessary, including language associated with the text structure. Notice that the words key ideas was underlined, beginning, middle, and end was underlined, as well as logical order. So these are academic content to help you link into your language objective. Part 3 is where you're going to add supports and scaffolds. Think about what scaffolds or supports will help students output their thinking. Would visuals help them output their thinking? Sentence stems, vocabulary, word wall or word banks, graphic organizers, or manipulatives. This should be included as one of the components when you are writing your language objective to help students understand what they're getting ready to learn. The fourth part includes interaction with others. So you will need to think about with whom or with what will students interact. Will it be a partner, group work, writing a text, or the use of technology? So how are students going to interact? So you will need to have all four components to have a complete language objective for each subject. Now, let's think about Scarborough's reading rope. It includes two main components, such as a language comprehension, where you have your background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge, tied into or intertwined with word recognition, which includes phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. All of these skills are intertwined to help students be proficient readers. Take a moment to review and look at this screen so that you can remember what Scarborough's rope includes and what to look for each component. Here are two examples of the language objectives and learning targets. So I just want you to take a moment to reflect. You may pause the video as needed to look at and review how they are written and to check to see if they have any of those components that I discussed earlier, as far as what you need to help you build and write your language objective. Here are two more examples that are written on anchor charts. So yes, you may utilize your anchor charts to write your learning objectives up so that you can reiterate and talk with students on what they need to do and what they're going to be learning. So this is very helpful when you have those students who need a reminder of what they're doing, a reminder of what they're learning. I will also refer to this as a teacher in my classroom as I'm teaching the lesson. I will continuously refer to the language objective and the target so that students can apply their learning. Here are two more examples. Notice that the learning target is written differently from the language objective. And notice that the language objective includes some vocabulary so that students will understand what they're going to be able to do based off of the language objective that you've written. Let's practice with a third grade standard. The learning target is 3.3D. Compose and decompose a fraction, whereas A over B with a numerator greater than 0 and less than or equal to B as a sum of parts 1 over B. So you will need to explain what compose, decompose, a fraction, a numerator, and the sum. You may have to include less than or equal to your students so that they understand the learning target. Here is where you will get in the vocabulary practice that's needed. So let's look at our first step in writing a language objective based off of that learning target. Remember, you have to choose an action verb connected to a language domain. So select the language domain that best supports how students will use language. So again, those components were speaking, writing, listening, and reading. So for speaking, you're either going to look at explain, describe, discuss, or share. For writing, you will look at write, represent, or label. For listening, they're going to identify or recognize. And for reading, they're going to either read or interpret. Choose the verb. So in this section, you're choosing the verb. So explain, speaking, and writing. So students will explain and write how to compose and decompose fractions. So that is the first part because you're taking from the first part, that domain, you're taking that verb and you're making sure you're including that in the first part of the language objective. The second part was to link the academic content or TEKS. So you're going to connect the language task to the math content. Based on TEKS 3.3D, students will focus on building and breaking down fractions using unit fractions 1 over B. Content connection. So you're composing and decomposing fractions into equal parts. So now we're looking at the actual breakdown of what the students will be doing with the fractions, which is composing and decomposing into equal parts. So make sure you are going over decompose, compose, and fractions into equal parts because they need to know what equal parts look like. So you want to be sure to include that. And now you're going to add in the supports and scaffolds, which was that third part, identifying tools that will help students practice and express academic language. So remember, you have those visuals. So fraction strips, number lines, and circle models will be good visuals. Remember to implement your sentence stem, I can show blank as blank, or the fraction blank is made up of parts of 1 over b equals. Then there's vocabulary tools, so math word walls or fraction anchor charts. Manipulatives will include fraction tiles or cutouts for hands-on practice. That fourth component is when you are going to include interaction with others, promote peer conversation, and use language. Students turn and talk to explain their thinking. Work in pairs or groups to model and compare fraction representations. Discuss how unit fractions combine to form larger fractions. Now that you've reviewed all four parts of writing an effective language objective, let's put it all together. I can explain and write how a fraction can be composed or decomposed using math vocabulary such as numerator, denominator, unit fraction, and whole, with the partner using sentence stems and visuals. So now the highlighted areas are the areas that I made sure to include for part 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the language objective document. Notice that I've highlighted them, so you may want to underline them when you're writing them on your board. You can also write them in a different color. Okay, so the main thing here is to make sure you have this up for every subject that you're teaching each day. So the example that I will have on my board will be my learning target, which is I can compose and decompose fractions as a sum of unit fractions to show how equal parts make a whole. My language objective would include I can explain and write how to compose and decompose fractions using math vocabulary such as numerator, denominator, unit fraction, or whole, with a partner using sentence stems, visuals, and manipulatives to support my explanation. As you can see, I've included those four components when I write my language objective, which is similar to the learning target, but is broken down to a kid-friendly version of what the students will be able to do in the task at hand. Today, you learned how to write an effective language objective by choosing an action verb tied to a language domain, linking it to academic TEKS, adding supports and scaffolds to help students use academic language, and including interactions so students can practice and demonstrate their understanding. By following these four steps, you ensure every lesson gives the students both the content knowledge and the language skills needed to express their mathematical thinking with fidelity. This is Coach Cordova with Language Objective Practice. I hope this was helpful to you, and thank you for going over the limit for your students to make sure they are being successful learners, and I am always here for your support. Thank you. Have a great day.